Picture this. I was elected to the House of Commons in May 2021, and pretty early on someone said to me, there's an MP you should speak to, but there was just one catch. She was a Labour MP. A few weeks later, I'm walking past the House of Commons library near the Speaker's office, and I spot her. I walk over to her and say, "Excuse me, are you Naz Shah?" Now Naz will tell you she looked at me, smiled and said yes. I remember her looking at me and she was probably thinking, who on earth is this 5 foot tall Scottish girl coming up to me? I explained that I was a new MP, we exchanged numbers, and from that moment on, we became good friends. Now I know what you're thinking, you're SNP, Naz is a Labour MP. And yes, there are things we will never agree on. Naz and I, for example, will never see eye to eye on Scottish independence. But here's the thing, politics isn't about agreeing on everything. It's about finding common ground and then using that common ground to push for change where it actually matters. Naz and I have worked on issues around women, justice, faith and community because those things cut across party lines. And honestly, that's what politics should look like. We spend far too much time tearing each other apart. And I want this podcast, and this episode in particular, to show that you can disagree passionately on some things and still work constructively on others. So today's conversation isn't performative, it's real, it's between two women, two politicians, yes, from different political parties, who choose collaboration over constant conflict. Welcome to the DemocraTEA podcast, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics. I'm your host, Kesser, and today I'm in conversation with my friend Naz Shah MP for Bradford West. And before we dive in, thank you so much for watching DemocraTEA. It truly is an honour to interview some really fascinating people and learn more about their journeys and then share that with you. If you don't mind, I have one wee favour to ask. It would be really helpful if you could please hit subscribe and follow us on social media. It's completely free to do so and helps us grow. And the more we grow, the bigger guests we can bring on and continue having really interesting conversations. Right, let's spill the tea. Thank you so much for joining us today, Naz.
No, thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure.
So we always start each episode asking the person what they are drinking. So what's in your cup today?
Definitely a cup of tea. Good, strongly brewed Yorkshire cup of tea.
Oh my goodness. So this is where we are going to agree to disagree. And this is one of the things that we're not going to agree on. You're a Yorkshire tea gal, I assume. I love Scottish blend.
No, it has to be Yorkshire or Tetley. Both of them work for me, so I'm good with either.
I'm loyal to Scottish blends. So, Naz, you were elected in 2015, and you've got this really interesting story from how you grew up to that point of when you were elected, but we can't say too much about it because you have a book coming out.
I do indeed.
And I am so excited for you. Is it March the 5th?
It is. So we scheduled it to ahead of March the 8th, which is the International Women's Day. So it's to mark International Women's Day. So the Bradford launch is on International Women's Day, which is super exciting. Oh,
fantastic. Am I right in saying you can pre-order it?
Yes, it is available. It is called Honoured by moi, and it's an interesting. So Honoured is obviously, for those who know about my life, it's been it's been about women's rights activism. It's been about my forced marriage at 15, leaving school at 12, my mum being in prison, me fighting for her to get released from prison. So all of that detail and the actual journey. So what people know is, from my viral blog in 2015, from, when I've talked in Parliament, but the book actually goes into much, much more detail. So yeah, and it's available pre-order on Amazon, on Waterstones, all good bookshops, and releases on the 5th of March.
I cannot wait to get my hands on it. But we're going to park your personal life and your journey to a side and look at your political life. So you were elected in 2015.
Yeah.
But you weren't actually selected. It was someone else who was meant to be the candidate. You're then chosen to be the candidate for Bradford West, and you're up against, I would argue, the charlatan that is George Galloway. My goodness. What was that election campaign like?
It was vitriolic. It was very, very, in some ways, when I look back at it, I laugh at it because I think, wow, the attempts to intimidate me, the attempts to derail me, you're not just up against George Galloway, you're up against the Baraderi system in Bradford.
What does that mean?
Baraderi system is literally, so like we have we have, one for a better word, clans, as in unions. So unions would be seen as a Baraderi. It's like a clan system, right? Where you're aligned to each of us, you have allegiances and you have political beliefs, etc. Baraderi is very much that, but it's about families and it's about your links. Baraderi politics is a Pakistani model of politics imported from Pakistan, but it is patriarchal in its nature. It is about men holding positions of power. It's not about community development. It's not about social justice. It's not about equality. It is about gatekeeping. It is about power. It is about holding, a bit like Game of Thrones, who's going to sit on the seat of power. So in 2012, when Galloway took Bradford, there was a big report by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation because that was seen as a Bradford earthquake. And what that pinned it down to was that George Galloway won, and he got my vote the first time round because he said he was going to dismantle Baraderi politics, because that is what Baraderi politics is not a model of union bringing together. We have the Fabian Society in politics and women's groups and all of these. Yeah. We're all fighting for a socialist cause or a cause.
It just feels like it's men supporting men.
This is about men supporting men, and it's about which family you're associated with, and it's regressive, it's patriarchal in nature, and it's power for the sake of power, not for progression.
And then here comes a woman.
Yep.
Who has gone through so much in her life, and you're like, actually, I'm going to challenge this. So it sounds like you're actually battling two battles, this kind of two-pronged approach. On one side, you're challenging George Galloway, but on the other side, you're also trying to challenge the beliefs in your own community.
Yeah, absolutely. So the belief in my own community, one of the things about Baraderi politics is it's not the wider electorate. So in my constituency of Bradford West, I have 60%, around about 60% Muslim heritage community, Muslim community, and the rest is non-Muslim. And in that constituency, the largest diaspora community is of Pakistani heritage. But the majority of that Pakistani community reject the notion of Baraderi politics. But if you've got Baraderi politicians, that's their lifeblood, if you like, is maintaining power. And good people, normal people, haven't got the energy for that because we've got day jobs, we've got, businesses to run, we've got, kids to look after, all of these things, everyday life really. Whereas Baraderism is literally about keeping power and a lot of energy goes into it. So good people can't match that energy, negative energy. It's like if we look at the far right now, right? And I'm not comparing the two, but I'm using it as an analogy. You've got people who have got energy and that's the only cause they have, right? Is division, is hatred or whatever. In Baraderi, it's about power, maintaining power, and that's their sole cause. And what happens is, the rest become a silent majority, if you like. So the Bradford West rejects Baraderi politics. If it didn't reject Baraderi politics, I'd have never been elected. So the fact that George Galloway was elected, the fact that I've been elected not once, not twice, but 4 times now, that is a clear rejection from the electorate. So my community, it's not something that's endorsed by the wider community at all.
So 10 years on, do you think that kind of Baraderi politics hold over the community still remains, or do you think that's diminished?
No, I think it's nowhere near what it was in 2010, prior to the 2000, that era. I think it's massively changed because people are now standing up. Even the young boy who stood against me in my election, in my latest election, 21-year-old, was not part of a Baraderi system. Now, what disheartens me is now that is somebody who would have, and I spoke to him before the election, long before he became a councillor, and he saw it as he would never, ever be able to make it in Bradford as a Labour Party politician simply because he didn't belong to a Baraderi. So when you've got those talented young people, as they might be, and have ambitions to be politicians, they then stand against the party. And the reason they stand against it is because it becomes a protest vote against a Baraderi. So that's where we need to be really, really careful about how we nurture young people into politics And it's not okay. You should not be judged about which family you belong to and which family you don't belong to and whether you've got that power politics. No. So I think it's very, very diminished because the wider community does not accept it. It rejects it. And B, within the system, it's like, 4 elections on. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the next election. Maybe they'll come back together because they seem to revive themselves around my selection time and election time. But yeah, I think it's shifted drastically.
But it still feels quite misogynistic in nature.
Oh, hell yes. Of course it's misogynistic in nature. In Bradford, we've never had a woman winning without an all-women shortlist. And women, particularly of ethnic minority heritage, have literally said to me, when you stand in politics in Bradford, and these are the words of a councillor who stood for a council's position, says it feels like you have to be, you're literally stripped naked to be able to stand. That is misogynistic. Oh God, it's patriarchal, it's misogynistic, it's horrendous. The idea that women have to be held to that standard and have their, the kind of vitriol that is directed at women who stand in politics is disgraceful.
See, this kind of Baraderi politics, I mean, I just find it wild. And it's not something that I've really come across up in Scotland, but it might be there. The question then I have is, see, within this Baraderi politics, have they ever put up a female candidate?
Well, from the Baraderi politics, aside from a all-women shortlist, I haven't seen any, no.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating that there have been people have, put their colours to the mast, if you like, as from a female, local female councillor, and because that was association with Baraderi politics. But again, I'm not convinced that female councillor came through without an all-women shortlist. And if she did, she there are one or two, but there's not many that are came through without there isn't many who've come through without the Baraderi system, no. So and the ones that do come through on all-women shortlist, if you spoke to them and they were honest about it, and I mean they were really honest about it, because privately they're very, very expressive of how, so they are not, I've had councillors saying to me, we can't come and campaign with you, Naz, because we'll never get reselected again, even though they'll support my politics and they'll privately support me.
Are they Labour councillors?
Labour councillors. God, yeah, Labour councillors.
So wait, this Baraderi politics is entrenched within the Labour Party locally?
Yes, because what happens is, and the Labour Party are fully aware of this, so what happens is that there's a two-pronged approach, right? So you buy the membership, you've got Labour Party members, and you've got lots of Labour Party members who will turn up when the selection process happens. So you
don't see them otherwise.
Yeah, but no, you'll never see those people who are members out campaigning during an election. And then if you say, well, you should have those criteria, and it's like, well, it's a democracy. We pay for our membership, we're entitled to vote. But you only turn up to vote when it comes to your selection candidates, and that selection is the selection that is, once they've got shortlisted and once they've been on the programmes. So yes, it's not democracy per se. No.
I just find this wild. Because there's yourself, there's other people, like Saidash, who's not too far from Bradford. She's from like the Dewsbury side. There's people like Shabana down in Birmingham. There are women involved in politics. But it just feels wild that these women, and myself included to an extent, but I think Scotland's slightly different. I've just not seen this Baraderi politics there. It just feels like you're challenging the misogyny and the sexism that you receive from other communities or the far right, but actually this kind of internalised misogyny is really prevalent. And we don't talk about it.
No, we don't.
And I feel like we don't talk about it because we don't want to shame our own community, but actually they're difficult conversations we need to have.
Yeah, so I've never shied away from talking about it. And I think because the reason is, if I want democracy for my community and my constituents, that includes the 40% non-Muslims as well. If I want real democracy, then we have to be fair and we have to be equal. It cannot be that you choose somebody because of their family background. And one of the reasons why I came into politics was years ago, I was asked the question, what is wrong with Bradford? And I said racism. And I got a short kind of, a look on the response was why racism? And I said, well, because you do not challenge the system, and the system is regressive. It's not empowering women, and it's men who have power for the sake of power and deliver you block votes. So from my perspective, that in itself is racism, because you're not looking at the issues, you're looking at race and what, that's a racist mindset. So for me, that's the issue with Bradford politics and you had councillors who didn't know how to chair meetings, and you didn't know how. Look, not having a language skill does not make you not be able to contribute to your community, right? That's not the issue. But you still have to have a skill set. You still have to have an understanding of processes, procedures. If you're chair of a scrutiny committee, your job is to hold officers to account. If you're a serving councillor, you're not only representing your constituents, you also have a responsibility to hold the officers to account who are delivering on behalf of your constituents. Now, not being able to contribute to those conversations just because, and you've been put in that position of power just because of the family you come from, and it's not a competence-based system, that is worrying for me. That is shifting, and I don't think so. When I say it's prevalent, yes, it is very much prevalent, or it was prevalent in the system within the political system, but it's definitely not something that's prevalent outside of that political system. Outside of that political system, I am very, very clear that the community, by and large, reject it, because if they didn't reject it, I would never be elected. They do not endorse this kind of behaviour. They do not endorse this kind of misogyny. For the handful of people, and trust me, it is only less than 100 people out of 70-something thousand people who are registered to vote in my constituency. So on the scale of it, it's a small, small, small minority. And the rest of them, the businesses in Bradford, the community in Bradford, the majority of them, the vast majority of them, of the members from the Pakistani community reject it, and they reject the misogyny and have supported me. So it's so that's why you keep fighting the fight, right? Because this is just it's a big battle in the scheme of politics, but it's a small thing in the scheme of Bradford wide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I suppose for people like yourself and me, we're quite happy to talk about these issues. And alhamdulillah, we have that ability to. But the reality is that for so many women out there, and you alluded to some of maybe the councillors in the local area, they can't have that conversation because then they're worried about the backlash.
Yeah.
What advice would you be giving them?
Well, they've got to work within the system that keeps them, because you've got to think about, okay, what's the ultimate aim of what I need to do? Do I need to, if it puts me at risk and doesn't allow me to do the job that I can do to the best of my ability. So, for example, if a local councillor, female councillor, is not coming out to vote, to canvass with me, etc., is unable to show me the support, then I'm not going to hold that against her, because I know how the system works. So I'd rather her deliver for her constituents, deliver for the people that have elected her, for her local council, because I don't want to put her at risk. So you kind of absorb a lot of that, because that's the position of leadership. That's the challenge of leadership, and which I rise to, because I signed up to what I've signed up to, and not everybody has that kind of level of resilience, and nor should they have to. Yeah. Nor should they have to. The idea of and I know how much abuse we get as female, but we get abuse as politicians anyway, and as female politicians you get it adds on to that, and then you can just pile it up because of the colour of our skin, and then because of a religious ethnicity, a religious background. And, if you dare speak another language, then Farage comes out and says, why did she speak another language in a campaign video? So it's that layers and layers and layers of kind of, issues that we have to face, right? Does that make it okay? No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. But the truth is, some of that is being so normalised, unfortunately. That's the fact of it. Then you've just got to support other women where you can and not expect them, whereas you've signed up to it because the where you're standing, really.
It sounds really isolating.
It's very isolating. But leadership, so I have two passions, right? One is community development, one is leadership. Leadership is always a lonely place. Leadership is always, it's one of the loneliest places you can be, because you have, it's a challenging places. And, if you and I as Muslims, we know the burden of leadership. If you don't feel it, it's not leading, right? If you don't feel challenged, you're not leading, are you? So in some ways, it's kind of, it's actually reassuring that there are challenges, that you're challenging the system, that you're challenging the narrative, that you're actually doing something. So you're actually, it's kind of validates that, the stress that you get from it is yes, I'm not pushing. If I'm comfortable, then what am I actually changing? Because change only ever comes when there's something wrong.
I don't think I've ever told you this, but I distinctly remember being really upset in Parliament once, and I can't remember what happened, but I was really upset, and I had a conversation with you, and you know where the members' tea room is?
Yeah.
The lobby just outside the members' tea room, so not but the bit where the stairs are, but just outside where the lockers are, and you and I think a couple of other people were there, but they were just in the background. You and I were speaking, and I was talking to you about leadership, but also isolation and just, feeling that I had the world on my shoulders and just navigating through that. And that's not really a conversation as MPs that you can have with other people. The reality is that only maybe other MPs are going to understand how you feel. And I remember having this conversation with you, and you turned around and you said something, and it changed my perspective for the rest of my life.
Really?
You turned around and said to me, and the one thing you have to remember is that this position that we've been given as members of Parliament, this is a blessing from Allah. And I was like, well, what do you mean, Naz? And she was like, not everyone is going to stand for election and get elected. There's countless of people that stand for election. There's countless people that want to be involved in politics. But there's a very, very small number of Pakistani Muslim women who actually end up here.
Yeah.
And it's so isolating and it's challenging, but also it is such a blessing from Allah that you have been given this position, that you have been given this voice, but you also have that voice. And it's so important that we use that voice at every consistent level that we possibly can.
Alhamdulillah. Yep, that sounds about right. Very right.
And see, when you told me that, genuinely, it changed my there's so much, Naz, in my life that you've said to me that's changed my perspective on how I view things. And I think as humans as well, very often it's very easy for us to think about the negative things.
Yeah.
But you've always been someone who I've come to, and everything that you say is grounded in faith. And for me, that's something that I remember quite often.
We have to, because ultimately, as Muslim women, that is where we land back, isn't it? We land back at where do we get the strength from? When somebody is, I've learned so many lessons in politics, and I think the bottom line for me, even when I was winning 2015 election, when I went out and I said, I said to people, I remember saying to George Galloway's people, I'll never forget this. I said, my niyat will define my outcome. And they said, you're really naive. And I said, do me a favour. And I actually said this to a supporter, and he's since become a supporter of mine who did not vote for me at the time. And I said to him, look, I says, you make dua, right? And he said, yes. I says, make a sincere dua that the right person to represent you will get elected. And I promise you I'll get elected. And he looked at me as if to say, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, of course. And he's like, you really are naive. And I was naive. But he came up to me after the day I won, and he said to me, you said this to me. And I did make sincere dua. I didn't vote for you, but I did pray the right person gets the job. For people of Bradford. And he says, and as a man of faith, I believe you and I'll never stop supporting you. And it was amazing. It was amazing just to have that kind of level of tawakkul that you have. If you're doing the right thing, it will work out. It always does work out.
Subhanallah.
Yeah,
Subhanallah.
alhamdulillah.
And how do you navigate that? Because I talk very openly about my faith, and I always laugh, Naz, and say I'm really proud to be a Scottish Pakistani Muslim. During Ramadan, most nights when I'm opening my rosa, I'll be eating a spicy curry and a cold can of fine brew. And I don't think any of that is at odds with each other. But we're in this kind of political environment that when you're visibly Muslim, and neither of us wear a hijab, but we talk about our faith quite a lot. When you're visibly Muslim, when you talk about your faith, especially when you're a woman, it just feels like there's so many attacks. And we feel that at a level because we're in politics or have been in politics. But actually, if you speak to random women on the street, random Muslim women, everyone's got that fear. They've got that dar inside them.
There's where we're at is really, we're in a dark space right now. And, when we had because I had major surgery in September, major spinal surgery, and I was at home, so I didn't go to party conference. The nice thing about not being at party conference was sitting in front of a fire and watching all the speeches. But one of the things that the Keir Starmer did say was that we are in the fight of our lives. And for me, it's about right now, I feel like we are literally fighting for the soul of our country. And for the soul of our country doesn't mean it's not about fighting for Muslims. it's about or against Islamophobia. It's just fighting for fairness. And that fairness isn't just for, yes, Islamophobia is through the roofs. It's absolutely, women are petrified. And I really worry because I've got a daughter who's visibly Muslim. And it's scary. It is scary. And I just think we have to double down. We have to, that silent majority who don't buy into this. And again, it's a fringe group, and it's a very, very, it's a bit, it is like those loudest voices are very few in numbers, but they bang the drum louder. So if you've got 100 people stood on one side and they're quiet and they're getting on with their life, and you've got one person banging a drum, that one person is louder. And what we have to remember is that there's 100 people who are silent against that one drummer. And that's the way this country is. This country is inherently our British values. There's no conflict between Islamic values and British values. There is zero conflict. There is zero conflict between the iron brew and the samosa and the chutney. Do you know what I mean? It's absolutely, that's being British, isn't it? What is being British? Somebody said, I think it was somebody who said on the TV, I think it was one of our new MPs, Naz Shah, who quite reminds me of you actually, feisty young lady. She said it beautifully. She went, it's, on a Friday night, having Friday Jummah, having, curry, and on a Sunday having a Sunday roast and a Yorkshire pudding. Or she said something to the words of that, and being able to go to a fish and chip shop on a Friday or something. And that really, really is what being Britain is. And I think we have to, along with our allies who are non-Muslims, fight for that space. And we have to fight for it in a way for the sake of Britain. It's not just for the sake of Muslims. It's not just for the sake of brown people. It's not just for the sake of, we have to fight for the sake of our country. Because me and you aren't going anywhere. We're here. We're Bradford. I'm a Bradfordian. You're a Scot, right? I'm very, very much Bradford and Yorkshire. I'm not about to go anywhere. And the other thing is, and the truth is, somebody like me from my background, had I been in a Muslim country, would I get to where I got to? The answer is no.
That's a really good point.
It's so true. There is no way. Do you think if I'd have been born in Pakistan, if I'd have remained in Pakistan, in the village, like I have done, that I would become a member of parliament in Pakistan? No. It's just not going to happen. Would I have been, unless I was involved with a political family where there aren't democracies in the Middle East, unless you belong to a family, would you get to that space? The answer is no. So I owe a great deal. I'm very, very proud of what Britain has given me. I have a debt of gratitude for social mobility that I wouldn't have been able to have in another country if I was in Pakistan. There is no chance I would have had that. So I think for me, what does that, what Britain gave me, and what Britain continues to give me and continues to give my family and my children, I have a responsibility to Britain. And that responsibility is about fighting for Britain, for the soul of Britain. Because Britain's soul, at its heart, the issues that are being exploited is about class and about poverty. You've got there's no difference. So for me, the lad from Bradford and the lad from Barnsley who can't get a job.
Between them, yeah.
There isn't.
There's more in common with them two than
there is,
Elon Musk.
Exactly. So the idea that you've got a white working class lad from Barnsley and a brown working class lad from Bradford, and both of them can't get a job, both of them can't get on the housing market, both of them can't get, or young girls, or whichever way you look at it, is structural poverty. Is structural poverty, and the society is structured to keep them in that space. It's not structured for social mobility. It's not structured to allow them to be the best that they can be. And poverty doesn't see. It doesn't see. It's like this. Like last night, I got called from LBC to come on to talk about Kemi Badenoch's latest rant. It's like there's no issue with British boys, and it's about other cultures, and it's like, which planet are you living on?
I think that's a question a lot of people ask when they hear Kemi Badenoch speak. Yeah,
and it's like, seriously, it's like you're really seeing that misogyny is a cultural issue. I don't know if you were there, but do you remember the President Club's dinner? It was on Park Lane. There were many ministers there, and the women that were serving the men. It was a whole crisis about the president. It was the club dinner for the elite men-only members
I remember
club.
hearing about that.
Yeah, of course it was. It was a
Yeah,
big
of course it was.
controversy.
It was a big controversy.
So what was that? That wasn't misogyny or culture. Was that, if you're saying that was cultural misogyny, then are you seeing the highest ranks of Britain have a culture of misogyny? You know, misogyny exists everywhere. Misogyny exists in all cultures. The abuse happens when power is juxtaposed with vulnerability. That doesn't see colour. That doesn't see class. It doesn't see any of that. Domestic violence happens. You know, the 2 women a week that are being murdered in this country. It doesn't see what class you're from. It doesn't see what... It is about male power over a woman. That's what it's about. That's what domestic violence is. It's cross cultures. So the idea that misogyny is or a cultural issue and it's not a societal issue, you know, it's just absurd.
But it's an easy argument for the right and for the far right to just blame it on people of colour.
Yeah, but that's a lazy argument, isn't it? It's like very lazy. It's like I said, it's a drumbeat, isn't it?
Is that not the issue with kind of 2025 politics? Is that there's not much space for nuance, debate, everything's kind of clickbaity?
Yes, but that's not just been 25. I think it's just the rise of social media. It's massive since 2015, since when I've come in, and now where we're at. But so what we need is a pushback now, and that pushback is coming because this didn't, that clickbait didn't happen overnight. It took years and years and years to get to where it's got to, and now it's up to us to push that back and take the fight, if you like, back to sensibility, and checking. And I do worry, with the rise of fake AI. I mean, this morning's news was about a fake AI video that a kid had made in France about the French coup. And that had got, the Macron actually received a call from a state leader saying, is there been a coup in France? And it's like, no, there hasn't. It was a fake video. So that worries me. But equally, we have got a fight on our hands.
Can I quickly just go back to race?
Yes.
Now, if we think of the early 2000s, many of us will remember the Bradford riots. And a lot of that was tension between communities, between Pakistani communities and Caucasian white communities. Are you worried that with this kind of rise of rhetoric in the far right, and we saw, the riots of the summer of 2024, are you worried that something like that's going to manifest itself again?
If I'm being honest, no. And the reason I think I'm not going to deny the rise of the far right. I'm not going to deny that, I'd be naive to think there isn't a threat from the far right. We've seen that. We know that from the Prevent numbers. We know that from the Home Office numbers, the plots that the police and services have thwarted against mosques, etc. We know that anti-Semitism has risen. We saw the synagogue attack in Manchester. We've seen what happened in Australia this week alone. There is a rise of extremism. There's no question about that. I genuinely think that there are people who are seeing this and are pushing back against it. And the idea that there was an idea that there'd be a summer of discontent, this summer just gone. It didn't happen because the vast majority of Britain sees this for what it is. They see the idea in Southport, what happened, that it was 3 girls who were murdered. That was, and the idea that you would then turn up and riot in that community the next day and the days following it and hurt those police officers who have just dealt with one of the most horrific things that they've probably ever dealt with in their career, and then attack those police officers, and you used that tragedy from them families. It's beyond heartbreaking, and people see through that. People are not stupid. So that's why I didn't think that we would have a summer of discontent and rioting. And I'm glad that we didn't, and that then shows you and demonstrates actually the vast majority of people saw it for what it was.
So you're not worried that there's going to be kind of a repeat of the Bradford riots?
I don't think in Bradford we didn't have those issues. I'm really, really clear that Bradford. Look, when people are protesting, people are, when they are at that space, they feel that they're not being heard, right? And when they don't have representation. I'd like to think that Bradford is very clear that it does have representation. Everybody might not be happy, and that's fine. That's democracy. We live in, we have different viewpoints. But I also think that there is representation in Parliament. There is representation in spaces where people of Bradford are represented, and we're not the community that we were in 2000 and 1999 and 2000. You know, in 2025, we've just had City of Culture in Bradford. There's a marked shift in Bradford in terms of pride, of place, of who we are, how we belong. You know, all of these things have changed in Bradford in the last 25 years. We're talking a quarter of a century on. Bradford isn't what it used to be.
It often feels like Bradford gets misjudged. And when people think of Bradford, they think of the two Ds, deprivation and diversity. What are folk missing?
Oh God, folk are missing so much about Bradford. God, I don't know. Where can I even start about Bradford? Do you know the arts and culture in Bradford? So we've just finished City of Culture. It's the final weekend this weekend. So there'll be celebrations marking that. That was, you know, it said what it did it did what it said on the tin, so to speak, which is, you know, our time to shine. I think Bradford gets, you know, it has that middle child syndrome. This is how I described it to Ed Miliband when he came in 2015, 13 even, to Bradford. I said, you've got Manchester and Leeds, which are two, like, you know, powerhouses, and then you have Bradford in the middle, and it's like where the poor, you know, the middle child, and that middle child has to come to its own, and that middle child is rising, you know. So it's like, so I think in terms of Bradford, the things with Bradford is that it has been missed from a transport perspective. If we just look at Battenham, you know, we're the only major city, we're the sixth largest economy in the UK that has a cul-de-sac of trains coming in and going out, right? We've now expanded, we've now got 7 extra services to London just since this May gone, because we've expanded a train station platform so we can have bigger trains coming in, so we can have more of that. But it still adds time. So we still have people do we have a bit of brain drain because we haven't got the infrastructure here? Yes, we do. That transport infrastructure is massive. So we now have, you know, Wyker, Tracy Brabin, the whole tram. I mean, that's been delayed. Only yesterday that news came out, but that will be massive in terms of connectivity, because ultimately we have to be connected to other cities, right? So those kind of things are exciting. In the culture footprint in Bradford, we have the amazing Bradford Literature Festival, the jewel in the crown for Bradford. You know, it's 11 years in it's in its 12th year. We've had people who are coming from globally into Bradford during that festival, over 10 days, over 120,000 people coming in. Look, you know, we're showcasing books from across the world. You know, people like Shashi Tharoor having, you know, the Doha Forum, Qatar Foundation having Doha debates in Bradford. You know, people coming from the El Hibri Foundation in America. You know, people coming to Bradford to see what Bradford has to offer and tweeting about our architecture, about the Brontes, the Turner Prize being in Bradford. You know, and we've got a quirkiness that people miss about Bradford. God, yeah, there's so much that is missed about Bradford.
Yeah.
The curry capital of the UK, the youngest city. We've got more. I was in a meeting with the Treasury this week with 2 ministers and with Islamic finance, talking about Islamic finance, and we were talking about we have got more startups than anywhere outside of London. That's the entrepreneurial spirit of Bradford.
Yeah.
You know, we're the only city with 2 FTSE 100 companies outside of London.
So there's this huge story about Bradford that's getting missed. But there are, of course, challenges as well. And there is a lot of deprivation, and there's working class communities who are really, really struggling. What are the kind of top 5 issues that are landing in your inbox this week?
So my inbox is different to, you know, so my inbox usually is around immigration. It's usually around people needing support to access Home Office services because they're not on time or whatever, representation there. Fireworks, my days, fireworks is a big issue because it's a pain in the neck, you know, especially wedding fireworks. That really causes me issues. I mean, there was an incident recently where I literally had to get out and actually speak to somebody about fireworks, and that were after 11 p.m. So that's one of the issues. Dangerous driving is a big issue. You know, that really does come up. The biggest, actually structurally the biggest issue, so these are social issues, as in, you know, social, you know, so those are social nuisance issues, is the dangerous driving, is the fireworks, etc.
I mean this in the nicest possible way, but see, driving in Bradford is not for the weak.
No.
That's the only way I can put it.
Yes, there is that. And what I will say, though, for the structural issues are different. The structural issues, the big issues, are about attracting investment. So if you're spending £1 for a square foot of Bradford land, and it's costing you £1 to build on it, you're not going to get pound back, the land to value, that's the issue. So until we start changing changing the perception of Bradford, which City of Culture has helped, which Bradford Literature Festival has helped, which PwC coming into Bradford, into Bradford as in a prime site in city centre has helped. There's all of these big organisations, the two FTSE 100 companies I've talked about, invest in Morrison's, Bradford and Bingley, etc. All of these contribute to the argument that, they're all Bradvocates. So, I call them Bradvocates, so they're Bradvocate for us, so that those, when they're going out and advocating for Bradford, Bradford's image is shifting. And that shift then allows us to invest in infrastructure. That shift then allows us to, impact on social mobility issues. So Bradford University, for example, #1 for social mobility in the whole of the UK. So we've got a lot to shout about, but that poverty of infrastructure still needs to be addressed. And I can tell you, in 9 years in opposition, it was hard work. It was hard work. And now I see, that lifting of a 2-child cap benefit has made a massive difference, because Bradford is one of the highest, for child deprivation statistically. Those issues are big bread and butter issues.
But that must have been a challenge, because when Keir Starmer first got in, he didn't remove that 2-child benefit cap.
No.
And it was a campaign. I mean, how do you reconcile believing in something that should happen, but then watching your leadership not do that?
So it's an interesting one. So on the 2-child cap limit, I can tell you now that where my position was, very much we wanted it lifting. The thing that swung people back towards voting for it at the time was the commitment to set up the child poverty strategy. So in some ways, the fact that they set up a child poverty strategy, and that child poverty strategy informed their decision to then lift that cap, that was the kind of my thinking at the time. But not everybody agreed with it. 7 of my colleagues lost their whip because of it. And they were proven to be right. So we haven't, people make mistakes. And I think on that one, should we have done it earlier? Of course we should have done it earlier. But we did set up, I was, we'd just come into government, and I was like, okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of a doubt simply because you've committed to this child poverty strategy. And that was led, the idea that we were going to have that and look at this in a deep dive way was something that sometimes you have to make in politics, this, and you've got to, okay, do I give you the benefit of a doubt and let's see where you're at in 6 months' time, even though that's not where I want to be. Okay, so I'm going to allow this as long as you're moving in the right direction, But it has been difficult.
Internal pressure politically.
Yes,
and I think
massively.
Sometimes people look at politics and they expect politicians to call out their party leadership at every single stage. But the reality is that you're part of a bloc, and you need to work out how to essentially play politics and push for that meaningful change internally. And that doesn't always mean shouting about it.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean shouting about it. Even so, there's this thing in, there's this, and again, I would say the idea that you can, let's take Palestine, for example. I resigned my shadow ministerial position. I voted with the SNP motion that day for the immediate ceasefire. My party wasn't in the space it should have been. And it wasn't going in that, I didn't feel it was heading in that direction. It took them another 3 months to get there. There are things, that from that perspective, you agree, you disagree, and you disagree. There are red lines and there are hills that people, politicians will die on. But there's also things that you have to negotiate. And there is, so external pressure is a good thing. But those 7 MPs might have been right and they might have resigned the whip. But was it their pressure, or was it the pressure of a collective that remained inside who actually moved? And I would argue it's probably a bit of all of it, right? But there has to be pressure built in from the inside. So right now there's pressure being built from 50 MPs who have really, really, been very, very vocal about the issue of jury trials. So that's 50 MPs internally. Will they be able to shift the narrative if you have 50 MPs voting against, scrapping jury trials? That's a big issue. So you build pressure from within. So the idea that politicians can automatically, would my becoming an independent MP have brought us a ceasefire, or brought us the recognition conversation, or got us anywhere and shifted the narrative where we have shifted it to? Yes, it's true that we could do more, But it's also true that we've done a lot more than what the Tory party did and what the previous government did and what if the Tories were in power now. So we didn't challenge the ICJ. We dropped that challenge. We did get to the recognition part. We did get to the part where we put sanctions on Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the settlements. So that was the thing that we wouldn't have had with the Tory government. So yes, it is true that we could do more, but it is also true that we have done more than what the previous establishment did. There are two truths, right? So, but people to expect, well, Naz, if you become an independent, then what? Then what? Then what? How do I remain relevant to be able to influence? Because in politics, you have to be relevant to influence. If you're an irrelevant backbencher on the opposition party and you're not even part of a party, yes, you can get to say what you want, which is a lot easier. You can get to say what you want, but then what?
Yeah, you can't make that meaningful change within government. I'm going to come to Gaza in a minute, but the question I've got for you now is actually kind of on this irrelevance part. You sat on the assisted dying bill, and that was a hard slog. And I remember having conversations with you whilst you were sat on this committee. It felt like it took over your life.
It did.
But how do you stay within a political party where you've got another MP proposing legislation that you fundamentally disagree with?
Well, democracy is about, convincing others and bringing them to your way of thinking, isn't it? When I went on that bill committee, and to be fair, I didn't have a very, very fixed view. I wasn't somebody who could potentially be convinced otherwise. But when I went on the committee, I realised that actually that wasn't that clearly wasn't the intention of tightening the bill and making it as safe as possible. That wasn't. It was about getting legislation through, which is, the biggest conscious vote since 1967 Abortion Act, which was also done for a private member's bill at the time. And I fundamentally, even my position on that particular legislation is more stronger than anything now, because now in the Lords there are attempts to even water down the amendments that we made and that were accepted in the Commons. So for me, the process has been horrendously flawed, deeply flawed. I have real concerns with the issues around safeguarding. But the other thing is, now it's in the Lords, the idea that you got it passed on the strength of these amendments in this place, and now in that place it's been watered down. And that to me is gaslighting the whole of Parliament. It's gaslighting those that voted for it, who might, had they known that this would be downgraded when it got to, the other place into the House of Lords, would they have then voted for it? It's not, that bill is not what was presented when it passed the reading for the first time for it to even get to committee stage. It is nowhere near what it was. The safeguards, for anorexia, for women, domestic violence, all of that for young people, for people, disabled people, mental health issues. It's not good. But that did take over my life. It really, and I won the backbenchers, backbencher of the year.
Congratulations! I seen that. Was that just a few days ago?
It was last week, and I wasn't around to collect it, so I tweeted about it yesterday. So I got backbencher of the year 4, which is really weird because I'm also a trade envoy for Indonesia, so technically I'm a backbencher, but I do represent government, but I'm not exactly a frontbencher. But if I was to vote against my party, then I'd lose that position. So it's like I'm in between it's an interesting place to be.
Well, I'm so proud of you, and I was really glad to see that. And you're right, you are a trade envoy for Indonesia. Is it ASEAN?
And the ASEAN, yeah.
Yeah, Indonesia. Is it Indonesia and ASEAN or just ASEAN?
Indonesia and ASEAN. Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that. So you're a trade envoy, you represent the UK government, but you were a shadow minister.
Yes.
And you, as you spoke about before, you stood down or you had to resign because you supported my party's motion on a ceasefire. I mean, and again, I remember having conversations with you about that, and it was a real challenge because you were very, very resolute in what was happening in Gaza. And you were trying to push for that change within the party, but ultimately you then had to take that step to resign. How did that feel? It
doesn't. You don't really question it, do you? You've got a red line. You've got a red line, And it's like, you have to. If you don't stand for anything, you can't. You have to stand for something. Otherwise, you don't stand for anything.
Yeah. And you have a large Pakistani Muslim population that you're saying. Did you feel like there was a lot of concern from your own constituents?
Absolutely. God, I've had more emails on the issue of Gaza and Palestine than most things. I've had 4,000 emails in a day. It's as an MP, a few hundred emails a day, which consumes the inbox. But when you have like thousands every single day, and rightfully so, people are making their positions very, very clear. So it is an issue for my constituency. But even if it wasn't an issue for my constituency, it's still an issue for me personally. Personally for me, the issue of Palestine, the issue of Kashmir, they're things that are close to my heart. They're things that I take a deep interest in. And I was actually thinking, because I was at Umrah only last week, and the last time I was in Jerusalem, and you walk on them cobbled steps, and you walk on there. And I was actually thinking, it's Christmas time. I was thinking about Jesus. I'm thinking about Moses. I'm thinking about Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. All three of them walked on those cobbled steps. You just feel so. It's such an emotive place and an emotive time. So I met the Reverend who came to speak to us from Palestine just this week, with the Palestinian ambassador. And he was talking about Christmas in Palestine. Jesus was born in Palestine, so it's really, really, this isn't the issue of Palestine has never been about religion. It's been about an occupation, an illegal occupation. That's what it is. And that's what and we need to address those things, and we're still not addressing it. But I'm really, really glad. And this week, finally, the ambassador, Hussam Zomlo, received his official letter where we, as Britain, have recognised Palestine, which gives him full diplomatic, recognition, which
has been a long time coming.
A long time coming. We said as a Labour Party we'd have done it in 2014. We walked the floor on the vote Ed Miliband did at the time. We should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah, but alhamdulillah, it's now happened. I mean, there's a number of things that have happened with Palestine and Gaza. Over the years, we've seen recognition now of Palestine as a state, but there's still so much more that can be done. What are kind of the top three things that you would be pushing for the UK government to do in terms of supporting and challenging the genocide in Gaza?
I think the things for me are very much about medical aid getting in, rebuilding of Gaza. There's also some really, very good work being done by Ibtisam Mohammed and others who are trying to get students out of Gaza to be able to come and study here. So that work needs doing. But there's also, even rebuilding democracy or rebuilding structures in Gaza. It's about us putting pressure, this peace plan. How does it actually look like on the ground? Where does it give the Palestinians? It's like, I remember speaking up against the Abraham Accords because you can't have something about me without me. So if you don't have Palestinians at the table, to make sure that you ensure the Palestinians are at the table, because they should have the ability and they should be part of that conversation to determine their self-determination, if you like, comes from them. It can't be imposed upon them. So I think that those are the kind of conversations that are happening in the background now to ensure that and the aid is massive. It's a massive issue. Getting kids to get treated in the UK who have had limbs torn apart, who have, been injured during the war. It's those are the things that are really important to me right now. The West Bank, again, what's happening in the West Bank, the annexation, the illegal occupation, the persecution of people being driven out. It's horrendous. It's horrific.
You're very strong on Gaza, and you have referred to what's happening as a genocide. You've been consistently strong on Palestine, but ultimately you are a member of a political party where you go into group meetings, I imagine, on a weekly basis, and you're in the same rooms as people who have fundamentally different view to you. Like, how do you reconcile that?
Because if I'm not there and I'm not trying to convince them, then I do not have, whilst there is something that still can be done for the Palestinians, whilst it can be for Palestine to be free of an occupation, an illegal occupation, I don't have the authority or the moral authority to rest my laurels. I can't. I have to, as long as though I know that there's something that remains to be done and it can be done, then my job is to work for it. And that reconciling, being in that position, if it's like that conversation you and I had, if God has blessed me with the ability to influence, then it's not my job to put my feelings before that. My job is to use that ability to influence. And at times it is lonely, at times it is uncomfortable, and at times it is darn sight hard, but that's my challenge. And I genuinely, my challenge is nothing in comparison to what the people in Palestine are going through. So do you know what? I haven't got the ability to think about my feelings. With all due respect to me, my feelings don't come into it. What comes into it is my moral obligation to do the best that I can do. And until I've done that, until I've exhausted that, then I haven't got time to rest.
You've spoken about international issues like Palestine and Kashmir. What else is important to you?
Well, right now what's happening in Sudan is horrific. So I'm speaking to Islamic Relief. I've I want to go out there. What's happening in Russia, in Kiev, there was a lovely email about potentially going out on a visit there to see what's going on there. What Putin's doing, that's horrific. What's happening the war on Ukraine, it's 4 years. 4 years, so it's like, that's painful. I have a Ukrainian community in my constituency. I have, Syria, what's happening in Syria, the rebuilding of Syria, what's happening over there. What Trump does affects us all, unfortunately. What happens, all of these things. There's being a parliamentarian, yes, you're representing your constituency, but what happen in the Middle East impact on us. Right? So what's happening in, the idea that Trump attacks Venezuelan oil and oil prices rocket, that affects my constituents. If my constituents are living in poverty and the fuel that they're using to get to work and back to be able to make their living, so global issues, there is always a link back to the dining table in my constituency. So I've got to make those representations on behalf of my constituents to get infrastructure support, for jobs, for education, for young people, all of these things. But I've also got to, as a parliamentarian, as Parliament, as an internationalist, you've also got to think about the global issues as well. They're never too far away.
Bringing it back locally, one of the big concerns I have is a rise in toxic masculinity, and it ultimately has an impact on all young boys, but I want to talk about young Asian boys. What concerns do you have about toxic masculinity?
Well, there's a number of concerns, isn't there? From young Asian boys, I think they're very, very similar, really. It's about young men finding that it's interesting, I had this conversation about young people with, believe it or not, with a Reform MP, with Danny Kruger, because Danny Kruger and I did the assisted dying bill together. And we found, it's like what you said at the beginning when you opened up, we find things that we can work on from a common perspective. And I think what happens is when you have the rise of social media, if you look, I saw an interesting graph which showed that there's a correlation between the rise of social media and mental health of young people. Right. So that's a very, very, the research is showing there's a clear correlation there. So if you're on social media and you're getting your information from social media and then your algorithms are pushing you to a certain place, then you're being pigeonholed. You're directed into your social media is directing you. So in normal life, when we're interacting with other people, we have different views. We challenge openly, constructively, and we learn those skills growing up. But if your time is on social media and that's opening up a whole different world, if you like, parallel to the world that we live in. That has contributed to this. That has contributed through social media. The idea that life is, so for an Instagrammer or a YouTuber, my youngest 14-year-old loves chunks and loves, these amazing, some of the challenges even I found looking at them and watching them and thinking, okay, this is cool, but they're influenced by these social media influencers. But what they're not seeing, that those Instagram moments out of 24 hours, they're just 30 seconds of perfection. And you can't pursue that perfection for a 24-hour day, right? So your expectations have changed for young people. And that's for young girls and young boys. the issue of toxic masculinity, I think, and somebody asked me the other day about this. I was at the North London Council of Mosques, and said, how do we, from a Muslim perspective, how do we change that? How do we do that? And I said, tarbiyah for me, from a Muslim perspective, is about schooling from home and the teachings of what it is to be a human being and a good human being to contribute to society. And we have the model in Rasul Pak Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We have guidance in Hadith. We have role models now. So there has to be a pushback. But there's also issues for young people. The toxic masculinity is one of them, and there is some pushback against it now, with role models coming out and talking about it, and we need to talk about it. You know, it's interesting that Kemi Badenoch said yesterday in that same post, we need to stop looking at adolescence. You know, and it's like, wow, how can you not look at adolescence? You know, because adolescence cuts across those kind of, that is where toxic masculinity leads our young people to think, to be in that framing. So I think there's a bigger, wider conversation to happen. But I also think it's really, really important, you know, the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which was announced yesterday. And from the bits that I've got, I am not over the detail, all of it, but the bits what I got, which was about teaching young boys earlier in school, that's going to be a positive. I don't think that's a negative at all. I think that's and there are social media influencers now who are picking up on this, who are influencing and pushing back against this. So there is a movement. And I think that's really, really important. I think my worry for my constituents and young people is that there are a few. One is alcohol, one is drugs. One of the big issues is laughing gas. You know, we still have young people using laughing gas canisters, and that's a big issue for me. So those are things that I really, really want to explore more with children, looking at young people through schools, etc. Those are the things that worry me.
And do you think we talk about that in the Asian community, that
No.
there are young people who are taking drugs, there are people who are misusing alcohol, that we're seeing teenage pregnancies?
No, we don't talk about it enough. We're still not talking about it. We still have the concept of honour and izzat and all of these things that we are bound by. You know, when my book is called Honoured, and it will explore all of this, and I really, really can't wait for you to read it. But there is this thing about, for the sake of izzat, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to call this out.
Log kya kahengi?
Yeah, that's
which
the classic
translates
line,
to
yeah.
What will people say?
Yes. So there is that thing. But then people like us in positions of power need to start talking about it. And I know that I'll be talking a lot about it in the next coming few months, because my whole concept, my book is called Honoured. And it's called Izzat, isn't it? It's about Izzat and what does Izzat mean? When you're, you know, the idea that women bear the brunt of shame and men carry the kind of Izzat, and it's defined by how women behave and how women respond. And there's a disconnect between young people. There's a disconnect. So there used to be, in my era, there used to be a disconnect of language. Right, but it didn't impact as much. So you still might have had a cultural difference between me and my mum, because I spoke English. You know, I went to watch Rocky IV with Joanne and Michelle, and, you know, Joanne, I remember, you know, all of these little things that you remember that were a very different culture, right? But that was not as wide, that gap wasn't as wide as it is today. And today it's wide, even if you speak the same language, just because of social media. Because if your child is on Snapchat, I'm not on Snapchat. I've tried. I just can't do it, right? It's hard enough managing social media. I know you're good at it because you're a younger generation, right? I'm trying to get better on Instagram. I'm trying to get better on all of these things. But it's not, right? My kids take the mick out of me. It's like, mother, come on, get with it, right? But what I'm saying is there's a disconnect. So when kids are in their bedrooms now, who are they talking to? How are they communicating, etc.? It's a disconnect even between modern parents, even those that have the language skill, even those that have been to university, even those that are in their 30s now or 40s now. There is a massive gap, and that gap needs to be shrunk, not widened. You know, so there are some good programs happening around that, but that does worry me.
And that feels quite cultural.
There is the cultural element to it. Yes, there is a cultural element.
Like, you know, we can't talk about the fact that our child is taking drugs, or we can't talk about the fact that our child drinks alcohol and is getting drunk at the weekends.
Yeah.
It's just that shame that everyone wants to kind of disassociate from.
There is that shame. There's also, I think there's something else. There was a young boy in my constituency who committed suicide, and the family did not want to talk about suicide. and they didn't want to talk about suicide. And he was my understanding is that this young, and there's been quite a few of suicides, because I'm a former Samaritan, and I've worked, I talk openly about my own suicide attempts in the past, through my lifetime. But one of the things that happened to this young boy was he got involved in county lines, and some apparently when he was delivering something for someone, I'm assuming it was drugs, they went missing on the other side. So they said he'd taken them, and he then became debt-ridden to this organised criminal, and then he committed suicide. And again, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about that there is exploitation of young men happening in our community, and that our children are equally vulnerable as anybody else. Young girls, when it comes to grooming or sexual exploitation, there are many, many Asian young girls who are in that position. And I know I've spoken to one, I think it's been the last 4 years now, comes from a very conservative family, can't talk about it, is very, very clear. She's been exploited, does not want to bring shame on the family, so will not talk about it, but is eating her up inside.
But then another one is teenage pregnancies as well, and that can be between two young people. So it doesn't have to be abuse or exploitation, but they end up getting pregnant. It's consensual, they end up getting pregnant, and the families just don't talk about it, and she's sent off somewhere else, or there's all these stories that you hear.
There's a story that I heard, again, one of my constituents who turned up, who was teenage pregnancy and had to leave a town. That is happening, that does happen. We do need to talk about it.
Yeah. And the other big one that we don't talk about is divorce. And it's something that you and I have spoken about quite a lot, actually, on a number of different occasions, because I've got very, very strong views on how Pakistani Muslim women who are divorced can be perceived.
Yeah, and I think that the shame is, and I talk about this in my book, is the shame is that we talk about there's a disconnect between culture and actual practice in Islam.
100%.
There is. So for me, for me, the bottom line is if we had men behaving like Muslims, or even women or communities behaving like Muslims, we wouldn't have these prejudices. Prejudice is everybody has prejudices. We all have prejudices because of our conditioning, how we're framed as young people, etc. But the absolute truth is that women, who are divorced, and the way the stigma is attached to them and still attached to them, whether they've got kids or not have kids, or whether, we can't marry, if somebody falls in love, I can't marry her, or my family won't accept her because she's a divorcee. It's just pathetic. It's horrendous.
I know a story of a girl like that who fell in love, and one of the parents was like, well, she's divorced, she doesn't have kids, but she's divorced. You can't have...
Yeah,
can't do that.
It's that's deep in a patriarchal notion, and it's the opposite of honour.
Yeah, it is, and it's the opposite of Islam.
Yeah, it is the opposite of Islam, and it's poor, but there are still communities, but we've still got work to do. We've still got a lot of work to do, but what I will say is that we have shifted. Definitely. So when I was campaigning in the 1990s for my mum's release, and I was on the streets of Bradford West, same place now, people would come up to me and say to me, Naz, we support you, but we can't sign your petition, right? Because we just don't, because of it's bestie and all the rest of it, but I think we're doing a really good job. So they'd come and privately support me. In comparison, in 2016, so we're talking 20, 30 years later, 1996 to 2026, literally about 25, 30 years later, when Samia Shahid was murdered in Bradford, when she was murdered in Pakistan, but she's, a girl from Bradford who was murdered, and she was raped, brutally raped and murdered, so-called honour killing. The idea that every single, the biggest businesses, the Pakistani businesses in Bradford, sponsored a table to raise funding for the Honour Her campaign for Islamic relief, of which I'm an ambassador, sent a message. And it sent a message loud and clear. Does that stop honour killings? No, it doesn't. Does that stop forced marriages? No, it doesn't. But what it does demonstrate is that there has been a societal shift. And sometimes we also beat ourselves too much. So we have, look, and I was saying this to somebody just this last week, is like the idea that it's just from community development. And again, I go back to my passion of community development. The white British community isn't where it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago. It has developed, right? So in 2010, there was somebody who stood for election who was using clear homophobic leaflets to get votes, right? There was, in my lifetime, there were parties who used leaflets who said, if you want an N for your neighbour, vote Labour. That was in the 60s and 70s, I think. I think it was whilst I, in the last 50 years or so, or 60 years maybe. That isn't where society is now. All societies move, not just the Asian community. So the white community has moved, the indigenous community has moved. So there's nothing shocking to expect the Asian community to move from the cultural, their cultural heritage and have a different viewpoint. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. It's how you move with it rather than as long as it's not oppressing people. And to me, it does go back as a Muslim. If you're empowered through Islam, you'd have none of this, this crap really of this judgmental attitude towards a woman who's divorced, because divorces happen, get over it.
And it's a right in Islam.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much. We're going to start wrapping up. Before we do, I normally do a quick fire list or that round. But actually for you, I've just got a couple of questions that I think I'm interested to hear. I don't know if anyone else is. But the first thing I always start off with is, what are you currently reading? This is where you say your own book. Right.
Well, I would say my own book, but I'll tell you what I've ordered. And I'm actually reading The Compass of Being. The Compass of Being is a beautiful book that one of my staffers gave to me. And it's Sheikh Hamad. And he's only a young, surprisingly young, 27, 28-year-old who's written this enormous book. And where it talks about, it's like a self-help thing. I love these self-help things. The last book I read was, before that was, I read it in one sitting, was Mel Robbins' Let Them Theory. Anyway, so I love those kind of books, the Atomic Habits and all of them. Mm-hmm. But what I love about The Compass of Being is it talks about self-actualization. It talks about self-help from a spiritual perspective. And it marries up with a Western perspective. So it talks about self-actualization. And when you reach that space where you're living beyond you and you're living for the sake of a cause or a belief or a conviction, which in my case as a Muslim, in your case a Muslim, would be for the sake of God, and you're giving that, then what happens is then you suspend all your kind of, it makes you, when you reach that, it's so empowering, it's so uplifting that the world works to help you to achieve what you want to achieve, right? So that really, really, in terms of, for me, that The Compass of Being is my current book at the moment.
And I know exactly who gave that to you when you said it was one of your staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the most underestimated issue facing Asian women?
Alcohol abuse. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a real thing. There's
that they're drinking it, or their partners or family members are drinking it, and
them and family members. There is real. When I say Asian women, I'm talking about young people as well. Yeah. There is alcohol abuse is a big thing, and I don't think we talk about it enough. No. But there are many things that we don't talk about.
What's the hardest thing about being an MP that people don't really see?
I think it's the time with your kids and missing your kids. God, I'm going to get emotional now. So when I had my surgery, I was at home, right? Because I was, and I asked my youngest, who's only 14. I said, we had this chat, and because I spent a lot of time lying down because it was major spinal surgery. And he said to me, he says, even though you've not been able to take me to school or whatever, I've loved the fact that I've come home and you've been home every day. And since then, I kid you not, and it's like in the morning. So I got back, sometimes we get back at stupid o'clock after votes, right, on a Wednesday night. So even though I got back at 1:30 in the morning, I still come back rather than waiting the next day, just so I can get 10 minutes with him and just so I can drive him to school in the morning, and I don't think anybody, it's really, you don't realise that, so I went for a physiotherapy appointment yesterday. You don't realise how many hours just travelling you do. So in your day, so a working day is 8 hours a week, right? 8 hours a day, 5 times a day technically, right? And as an MP, you'll get this. You've got a 4-hour round trip door to door, if not 5 hours. And that's your 10 hours. So you've got one day just in travelling. Yeah. And then on top of that, you've got your weekends. So yesterday I had physiotherapy and that really drained me. But then today I've got a whole day of work. Tomorrow I've got a whole day of work. Sunday I'm working, and you don't, It's not necessarily, it's not a 9 to 5.
No, it's not.
God, this job is not a 9 to 5. And then you get a phone call when you sat there, switched off for a minute, and somebody will say, you know, the media will ring, and you're like, I haven't got the energy for this. Let me switch off.
Let me spend time with my kids.
Yeah, and then it's like, so you don't always get that. I think that's the thing. The scrutiny is one thing. The abuse that we get, the abuse that you get as members of parliament, I don't think we talk about it. You know, we said, you know, we've had, you know, had 2 MPs who've been murdered. We've had, you know, since I've been in politics, and that's painful. That's painful enough. But I don't think, you know, I don't think people realise, I think it's underestimated the impact that can have on you.
I was just going to say that I think people acknowledge that MPs get abuse, but I don't think they actually see the impact it has on us. And it's really easy to say, ignore it. But it's like, well, I'm human. Yeah. And someone's saying something really nasty about me, like, yeah, of course I'm going to feel that.
Yeah, because I had a court case just recently where I had to actually give evidence. And it's like, you're sat behind your keyboard just ranting, but actually that's somebody. And it's like, and then somebody, and then what really surprises me in them is you get these really, really, you know, would normally, I'd think, sensible people saying, oh, well, you signed up to this. You know, you're a member of parliament. You should be able to take this. Don't expect any sympathy from me. It's not about asking for sympathy. It's about asking for empathy. It's about saying, guys, you know, when my 14-year-old kid, who's now 18, came home, I think he was 13 at the time, and it's the first time he'd Googled me or looked at the comments on my social media, and he said, Mum, why do people hate on you so much? And it upsets him. Right, my kids didn't sign up to that. You know, I signed up to being the best that I can be for the sake of, you know, my constituents and be their representative. But there's, I think it's, you know, that is understood. Yeah, frankly.
Do you have a New Year's resolution?
My New Year's resolution is trying to get a bit more fit and healthy and be a bit, the usual one. The usual one.
You should try reformer Pilates. I've started going to it. It's really good for your core strength.
Do you know what? I might just do that. I've got these next few weeks off. I have got some time off. We've got family wedding. Just be careful with your spine. Yeah.
Just be careful with your spine. But honestly, because see, as Asian women, I think just like our body, we're not used to like going to it's not really encouraged in our culture to go to the gym and work out, but it's really important to like have that core strength. And I find, I don't know what about you, but I find, see, if I go to the gym, I just get distracted or I get overwhelmed. So if you're in a Pilates class, that's like in a nice class that's not judgmental, it's quite good to follow along.
So I love the gym. I used to be, God, until I had this hit and run car accident, I used to be at the gym at 5 a.m.
Oh, really? Oh,
God, that is not me. The gym. Oh,
I go to like Pilates at 6 a.m, but I wouldn't go to the gym for
No, I used to be in the gym at 5 o'clock. So yeah, so I love the gym. So I love fitness. But because of my surgery, I can't do much of it. I can only do, and even now I can only do like, you know, controlled weights, not free weights, which is not what I'm used to. So I think now, I think the other thing is also being a bit more kinder to myself because, you know, menopause age, that's the other thing that we don't talk about. Yeah, it's underrated.
We actually menopause. Had a podcast on menopause in periods with Dr. Farah Ahmed. So I'm going to send that over to you to watch.
Yeah, please do.
And the first episode of 2026 is with Dr. David Hamilton, and it's all on kindness. So I'm going to send that to you. So when you're driving down to London to get to the House of Commons, you can listen to my podcast.
Absolutely.
And as we take our final sips of our teas, my last question for you is, what is something that grounds you in really challenging times?
My faith. That's the only thing that grounds me. Because you realise it's not about you. It's never about you. You're only temporary. You've got 80, 90, 100 years, some even more than 110. You've got a limited time. You've got limited abilities. So you've just got to do the best that you can do in that time. And faith gives you that grounding. So that's what grounds me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. All the best. And I'm looking forward. What's your New Year's resolution?
Oh my goodness, you're putting it back at me. That's interesting. I thought I was the podcast host. My New Year's resolution is to keep working on DemocraTEA. Can I steal yours? Be kinder to myself and be more fit.
Absolutely.
But you know what? I just feel like, see, as women as well, we just give ourselves a hard time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I had told you, see, before I turned 33, I tried 33 new things.
Did you?
So before I turned 33 in September, I made a conscious effort to try 33 new things. So I did really cool stuff, like I took a day trip to Belfast, I walked across the Forth Road Bridge, I walked 50,000 steps in one day.
Wow.
I tried like cooking or baking focaccia, I baked brownies, like I just did new things. And actually, I take back what I said. If I'm going to choose one thing to do in 2026 is to keep trying new things. Because do you know what? Kind of going back to what you said, we're only here for a finite amount of time.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know how long I'm going to live for. I don't know how long I'm going to have my health for. So, subhanAllah, whilst I'm young, relatively fit and relatively healthy, I may as well try new things.
Good for you, girl. Good for you. Carry on. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. A huge thank you to Naz Shah MP for joining me in spilling the tea on what it really means to navigate power, principle and public life when the cost of speaking out is very real. This conversation raises some difficult but necessary questions. What does political courage actually look like? And who gets punished for it? When conscience clashes with party loyalty, who should MPs be accountable to? And if large communities feel unheard or taken for granted, what does that mean for the future of British politics? Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think that the Labour Party has lost trust with Muslims and Asian communities? Was Naz right to resign over Gaza? And can Westminster ever truly represent communities like Bradford, or does it still struggle to listen? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of DemocraTEA, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics. See you next week.